Hi, everyone. We're just going to give a few minutes to let everybody funnel in. Thank you for joining us today. Just give it another couple minutes. Still see a few more people funneling in, so we'll be starting here in just a moment. All right, we're going to go ahead and kick this thing off. First, hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar presentation, Who is Leading the VVC Patent Race? I'm Leah Wilhelm, Director of Demand Generation here at LexisNexis Intellectual Property Solutions. We have a really informative webinar planned for you today, but before we get started, I would like to cover just a few things. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to access it in a follow-up email. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A section. And if you have any audio or visual problems during the webinar, please use the same Q&A tool. We will do our best to resolve them. We will answer as many questions as we can at the end. And once the webinar is over, you'll be prompted to complete a short survey where we welcome your feedback on this topic. Now let's get to know our panel for today. And as a reminder, the views of our panel experts expressed today are their personal views and not company views. Manoj Despanti is a Senior Director at Qualcomm Technology Licensing, a division of Qualcomm Incorporated. John Mulgrew is the Chief Patent Counsel at Lenovo. Luke McElroy is an intellectual property attorney and has been with DaVinci since 2016. And Rob J.L. Moore is an IP strategist and litigator who helps clients devise IP strategies. I will now turn things over to today's moderator and presenter, Tim Pullman, SEP Analytics Director here at LexisNexis Intellectual Property Solutions. Over to you, Tim.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah, for the kind introductions, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I will kick off this session with a very short presentation of the data that we have gathered in our latest VVC report. Before we will hear, of course, from our guest and expert speakers here that I'm really excited about to hear about the challenges of SEP licensing in the video codec world. As many as you know, one problem or challenge that we face with the world of patents and standards is that data on global patents, public, standards, global standards technologies, public, but they're really divorced. There's little connection between information on patents and standards. We do have information, of course, sometimes in declaration registers, patent pools, but again, that information is typically incomplete and not perfect. And one of the big things and challenges that we address at LexisNexis IPlytics is marrying together those databases, the world of patents and the world of standards. In the particular case of VVC, we find it particularly challenging because looking at the ITUT IPR register, it's a register where the video codec standards patent declarations are gathered. We see 43 companies declaring there, but out of the 43 companies, only 5 actually declare specific patent numbers. What does that mean? All of the other 38 companies provide so-called blanket declarations, declarations that say we own patents essential for VVC, but we're not going to list the actual specific numbers here. And we also have data on contributions. And if you look at the contributors of VVC, as little as 9% of them actually submitted specific patent numbers at ITUT. So we have a situation where the majority of the companies that either contribute or declare patents have not really made public the list of patents that are actually potentially essential to the standard. So 90% of the data is missing. We do have data on patent pools though, right? And that is a starting point. And that's actually also the starting point that we're using at LexisNexis IPlytics to identify the other patents. Because what we do is we're using a machine learning algorithm called LexisNexis Cipher that is using so-called true positive patents, patents that are part of a pool that we assume essential, and also true negative patents, patents in video codec, but not essential to video codec, to identify patents really for AVC, HEVC, VVC, AV1, and also VP9, right? And that algorithm, that classification allows you to really identify patents related to the standard. It will include patents essential to the standard, but it will also include patents that are only related to the standard. So our database surely isn't a perfect SEP database, but it identifies patents owned by everyone and not only by those few companies that make that data publicly available. Why is that important? We believe it's important because many companies in the market, may that be licensors or licensees, see a lot of question marks when they look at a landscape of patents, in this case for VVC. If they have an offer from a patent pool, they wonder, what is the share of that patent pool? If the pool asks 20 cents, how much of the patents are covered? Who else is outside of that pool? And are there patent owners, maybe patent assertion entities that I don't even know about, that acquired patents for HEVC or VVC? And many of our customers would then run the share of a patent family's owner's patents and compare it to the total stack of the patents in the space to kind of understand the share and the size of the portfolio compared to other portfolios or to other patent pools. And all that is really to facilitate licensing. We believe that with data, you can better determine what an actual friend rate is, even though data may be only one reference point among others. You can mitigate risk if you are an implementer and you need to know who is litigating in my space and who owns the patent. But for both sides, really, for the licensors and licensees, we really want to reduce the negotiation time in licensing deals. And now I want to give you some sneak peek of our recently published report in VVC to kick off the discussion and to look at the landscape. First of all, when we look at the patents of AVC, HEVC, and VVC, we see that especially VVC patents have been drastically increasing over the past years. Actually, if you compare 2017 to 2023, we see that it has increased by 4, right? So it's a sharply increasing landscape of patents here. But not only the number of patents, also the number of contributions, which are technical submissions at the meetings. In this case, we looked at JVAT, which is the VVC meeting, have exponentially increased, which is a typical case in standards development. But in only 2 years, the contributions increased by factor 6. And then what we did is we looked at the different companies in the market space, and we calculated their share of patents as to 3 different categories. The first one is we looked at all HEVC and VVC patents granted and active anywhere in the world, which gave us a percentage of the share of patents these companies own. Then in the second column, we looked at patents, that relate to VVC, but that may also relate to HEVC, right? So we allow an overlap. And then the last column, the third column, we only looked at those patents that are only VVC relevant and cannot be associated with HEVC. And that already shows you that for the different categories, the whole landscape of HEVC and VVC together, there's some overlap. That's why the second column is different. And then the third column would only be VVC, pure VVC patents. Equally interesting is when we look at the contribution data, which gives us a very similar ranking, but some companies are stronger in patents than in standards contribution. But also here we see the top 10 here based on the VVC contributions to the JVAT. And here we only looked at those contributions that are incorporated, meaning the JVAT meetings have voted in the contribution to be part of the final standard, right? Because only those, we believe, if covered by patents, count into a technical analysis of these companies' portfolios.
Hey, Tim, I don't know if you're presenting slides or not, but we're only seeing the first page of your slide deck. Just want to let you know. Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to give you the heads up.
Thank you.
No, that is a good point. I didn't see the comments here. Let me try that again. The slides, by the way, because I went through some of the slides now that you probably didn't see, are available also for download afterwards. So we are happy to share the slides with you. I'm sorry that you didn't see those. Is it now visible?
Yes.
Yes. If you, we're seeing your presenter mode. If you want to share the other screen.
Okay. I don't know how to switch that, but maybe
display settings in the upper left corner. See it up at the top?
Oh, there we go.
You should be able to switch.
There we go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we see
perfect.
the top 10 VVC standards contributors.
Very good. Sorry about that hiccup here. Maybe I show you very quickly the first also. This is the patent data based on the different columns. And this is the standard contribution data based on incorporated contributions. What we also looked at is we compared the share of the patents, but also contributions as to these different refinements and as to the region of the headquarter, kind of to see where do the companies come from that own most of the HEVC or VVC patents. And we see that the US companies and Chinese companies heavily dominate. They're far ahead of Korea, Japan, and Europe and other countries. Interestingly, though, we also looked at those companies that are listed licensees for HEVC and VVC in the different patent pools. And here, China is much smaller. US has still a big share, but Europe is one of the strongest or biggest companies or regions where companies actually implement those standards. I have to say, though, we only counted companies here. We did not consider differences, of course, in the number of products they sell. So weighting this is something that we probably have to do as well. Again, what I wanted to give you today is just a sneak peek of the data, also to kick off some of the discussion today. I think one of the things that we see in the data is that the ownership of patents, as well as the implementation of the standard, is global. It's a global challenge that we're facing. Companies are everywhere in the world. So our experts here can probably also comment on this, that we have an increasingly international licensing market. If you're interested to see more, we have this report out here. I think we're going to share also the link here in the comments so you can download the whole report with all the analysis that I just presented to you. Great, but now I would like to switch over to our experts, and I would love to start the discussion and hear from our experts actually about SEP licensing challenges. And I organized this here in a way that I would like to address different questions to our experts. But you as the audience will also get the chance, of course, to comment and to ask questions to our experts here. So if you do have a question, please don't be shy. Use the question and answer box, and we will, at the very end, also have time to answer your question. But let's go over to our experts. And the first person that I would like to address the first question here to is about the current state of video codec. And maybe to understand what is happening today, we also need to know what happened before and what happened in the past 10, maybe 15 years. And we have one expert here, Robert Moore, who has been an expert in our industry for many years now, and who has been supporting pools, who has been at standards meeting. Welcome, Robert. It would be great if you could kick it off and give us maybe a short overview about the history of video codec licensing and where we are today.
Thanks so much, Tim, and thanks everybody for joining. I'll just say I don't think I can limit it to 15 years because the story actually starts all the way back in the 90s, but I am going to go fast. So as everyone knows, SEPs, more than most ubiquitous standards, have traditionally been supported by patent pools. The purpose of the pools was to streamline implementation on the one hand by providing some cost certainty and some ease, transparency, and licensing, and also by identifying a particular segment of the value chain that would bear the royalty burden and allow the overall value chain to adjust. And then on the other hand, it was to streamline licensing that would make the revenues regular and predictable. So that in mind, MPEG-LA started in 1997 to support the MPEG-2 standard. At the time, the cost was $4 per unit. If you adjust that for inflation, that's about $7.83 in today's dollars. The MPEG-2 codec was created with a few different use cases in mind, but particularly physical media like DVDs and broadcast. And there was a relatively limited community of SEP holders. I think the bulk of the MPEG-2 pools patents were from Sony, Thomson, and Mitsubishi. Then AVC was finalized a few years later, 2002. This was a codec that was optimized for mobile use cases, recognizing that most of the compliant devices would also be compliant with the MPEG-2 codec and not wanting the overall patent cost of video compression to impede the penetration of video compression on this new mobile use case. MPEG-LA, which launched the pool for AVC, set its royalties purposefully low, significantly lower than the MPEG-2 pool, just 20 cents a unit. And if you adjust for inflation, that's about 34 cents per unit today. And again, the royalties were directed at devices and not elsewhere in the value chain. Another patent pool, VIA, launched a competitor AVC pool in 2004, 2005. Didn't really get the traction that it wanted, and it sunsetted that pool later that decade. Overall, AVC was a huge success. Even to this day, AVC is a huge success. It accounts for the bulk of not just video that's trafficked on the internet, but because of how much video is trafficked on the internet, the bulk of internet traffic is encoded using AVC. It's also a success in terms of the amount of the addressable market that actually took a license to the leading pool. Then in 2010, Google bought Onto Technologies for around $125 million and refashioned the Onto proprietary codec, which was then called TrueMotion, as the VPX suite of codecs. VP8 was positioned as a technical competitor to AVC. Google characterized the VPX suite as royalty-free. Not everyone agreed, and many took the position that codecs are a highly iterative field, and it's very challenging, maybe impossible, to create a codec that achieves commercially viable performance that doesn't infringe at least some of the previous codecs SEPs. And in 2013, Google took a license from MPEG-LA to the AVC pool on behalf of implementers to VP8 and to some extent, implementers of VP9 as well. Then in 2013, MPEG finalized the HEVC codec. This was a codec that was optimized for the HEVC use case and other emerging use cases. MPEG-LA started a pool. They said, we achieved such great results with AVC. We believe that's the price that the market will bear. So we'll use essentially the same licensing terms, 20 cents a unit. If you adjust for inflation from 2013, that's about 27 cents per unit in today's dollars. There's a contingent of major SEP holders that disagreed with this approach because they said the overall feature of video compression or compliance with video compression standards encompassed the MPEG-2 codec and the predecessors to AVC. And the overall royalty stack was significantly higher than was reflected in MPEG-LA's proposal. They didn't think it was wise to go from having the feature of compliance with these video compression standards cost somewhere in the neighborhood of a few dollars per unit down to 40 cents per unit. And they also took the position that content providers were capturing more of the value of the feature of video compression, therefore should be asked to contribute at least something for in terms of royalties. And those many of those patent holders formed the HEVC Advanced pool in 2015. This had a higher price point than MPEG-LA, and they initially sought at least some royalties from content providers. I think it was about $1.5 million per year capped. There was, in my opinion, a pretty strong negative reaction to the way that the HEVC Advanced terms were rolled out, or to the terms as they were rolled out. And the arguments were generally, the MPEG-LA price point was accepted. Why change it? Content providers hadn't been asked to pay before. Why start now? And also, how in the world can we deal with more than one patent pool at the same time? And then into that maelstrom stepped Marconi, which launched the Velos pool, a third patent pool for HEVC. The terms here were never made public. As I understand it, royalties were the same or higher than advances. I could be wrong with that. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. And then a bunch of stuff happens. Apple implements HEVC in iOS. Samsung joins HEVC Advanced, eventually tries to leave MPEG-LA. HEVC Advanced backs off its content royalties. MPEG-LA is bought by VIA, Velos sunsets, and we arrive for HEVC at a status quo that's as follows. HEVC Advanced, which is now called Access Advanced, seems to have licensed the largest share of compliant devices. Its price point is, it's hard for me just to characterize it here. It varies by geography and by use case, but in the US, since 2016 or so, a phone sold is about 40 cents. It is 40 cents per unit. That's a little over 50 cents adjusted for inflation. Among the other stuff that happened in that time period there was Google putting together the Alliance for Open Media, which is a consortium to advance and build upon the VPX suite of codecs, which have been rebranded as AVX. AV1 was basically VP10 with some tools from Cisco and Mozilla. Google took the position, or Alliance for Open Media took the position again. These were royalty free, and again, many disagreed. Cisvel, another patent pool, launched its own AV1 pool, seeking royalties for that and for VP9. And eventually there was a settlement in the past year that resolved at least some of the risk for implementers of AV1 and VP9. VVC was finalized in 2020. MPEG-LA and Access Advanced both launched pools. MPEG-LA, they used the same terms, licensing terms essentially as they had for AVC and HEVC, about 20 cents per unit. Again, royalties focused on the devices and not on any other segment of the value chain. Access Advanced has what I'd characterize as sort of a BOGO program, where if you're a member of its HEVC Advanced program, you can get the VVC license for a marginal increase of 25%. So if you have a phone and you're paying 40 cents per unit for a phone sold in the US, you're paying 40 cents per unit, then you would add on another 10 cents for the VVC license. And this was directed to devices as well and not to content. And then there has been movement afoot of late to have content providers start to contribute royalties as well. This is for the same reason that was advanced 8 or 9 years ago. Basically, the content providers are capturing a significant part of the value here, more significant than in the past, and should be asked to pay something in royalties. The Marconi has a pool directed to this, and I'm looking forward to hearing Luke speak about its successes. And I guess to juxtapose the where we were 10 years ago versus today. 10 years ago, we didn't quite have the Access Advanced pool, but we were on the eve of having Access Advanced. So 2 patent pools for HEVC, 1 for AVC. The AVC pool had licensed most of the addressable market at this 20 cents per unit price point. The MPEG-LA HEVC pool, also 20 cents per unit, had not had quite the same success, had some success. Access Advanced was in its nascency, as I mentioned, and that price point was higher. Then you fast forward to today. The MPEG-LA pool, since bought by VIA, it remains operative. It has some HEVC and some VVC licensees. And this is again at the 20 cent per unit price point. I believe VIA actually now offers VVC licensing as an incentive for joining their HEVC pool. I think they might actually be not charging for VVC at this point. So then the Access Advanced pool is it has more. I'm not sure it has licensees at this point, or at least if there's been compliant devices that are paying for covered units. But we have still a majority of SEP, the plurality of SEP owners have joined the Access Advanced VVC pool at this point. As for Marconi, they have had some purchase with the licensor community, and again, interested to see how they're doing in terms of getting licensees.
Great. That was a great overview, Rob. Thank you so much for 20 years of video codec licensing. Comparing also these prices is really interesting over time. Of course, we always have to consider that also the number of SEP licensors in these pools have changed, and one changed from one pool to the other. There's a lot of movement there too. So unpacking all that is of course a little bit even more complex. But that was a great overview. Thank you so much for that. Manoj, let's go over to you. Rob gave us a great overview of SEP licensing, but mainly, of course, focusing on publicly available data on patent pools. You're with Qualcomm, and Qualcomm, to my knowledge, has not joined any of those pools. I would love to hear from you how the licensing of Qualcomm worked over the past decades, and thinking about technology advances from AVC to HEVC to now VVC. How has that, in your opinion, influenced SEP licensing? Is this any different from 10 years, 15 years ago? Are there actually new use cases you can now license to? And how, in your opinion, has that changed the licensing game?
Hey, certainly, Tim. Very happy to participate in the webinar today. And Rob gave a very good overview how licensing has evolved over 2 decades. I want to give some background on technology and business evolution as a backdrop for that. So the evolution from AVC to VVC now spans 2 decades. And in those 2 decades, the technology has gone through tremendous transformation. Digital video today supports high resolution, high contrast, fast refresh, and vivid colors. All that brings in very high raw bandwidth. And video compression techniques, the modern video codecs, they actually play an important role in bringing compression efficiency. That compression efficiency helps save bandwidth cost. It helps save storage cost. And it does all that while maintaining the quality. In addition, modern codecs also bring in computing efficiency that enables fast, scalable encoding in cloud. It also supports energy efficient decoding in devices that brings battery efficiency as well. So both these efficiencies, they reduce end-to-end latency considerably. And these technology advancements are bringing real value to customers, to consumers, and to businesses. Our video consumption habits have changed from linear to anytime, anywhere. Over-the-top services are mainstream today, and video playback has shifted from TVs to smartphones, tablets, XR devices. By the way, Qualcomm as a mobile company is at the epicenter of this transformation, and our leadership in technology and standards has helped us create leading video codec technology patent portfolio. Getting back to your question on the transformation in the licensing space, Rob already covered device level licensing practice continues with bilateral licensing as well as pool licensing. What is changing is content level licensing. Last October, Avanci announced Avanci video licensing platform aimed for content level licensing. It'll be great to hear from Luke later on this. Separately, Broadcom is also in litigation with Netflix. Nokia is also in litigation with Amazon. Other licensors are likely in discussion with video service providers. So licensing landscape is certainly shifting. Coming back to VVC, VVC is the most capable codec today. It certainly outperforms AV1 and HEVC. With its versatile tool set, it's certainly like enhancing existing use cases, but it's also enabling new use cases. There is a growing interest in VVC in the industry. However, VVC is still in the early stage of deployments and likely in early stages of licensing. So that's a bit of a history of where we are. And hopefully it adds to what Rob said earlier.
Great. Thank you so much, Manoj from Qualcomm. We also have here today John Mulgrew, who is Chief IP Officer with Lenovo. And you, John, from your perspective, representing a company that implements video codec standards, how has SEP licensing evolved over the past years from your perspective? Are there more entities seeking to monetize their video SEPs? Has licensing approaches are more or less aggressive in your point of view? Do you find the landscape more transparent, or has it become more complex? What are your thoughts on this?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Thanks everyone for joining this conversation. This is a topic that I really care a lot about. I think standards are one of the leading ways that we can advance ourselves, our society. So, when I think about innovate, how we advance ourselves and sort of modernize, it could be medicine, it could be codecs, it could be other things, but the way that we innovate to improve our lives from a standards perspective, to me, should mean that it improves everyone's lives. And so the goal for me, in my mind, about licensing of standards should be optimizing for ubiquity, optimizing for widespread adoption of the technology. And I think Rob did a great job explaining the history of codec licensing. There have been times where codec licensing was done with an eye towards optimizing for widespread adoption. But there has been a shift in the last, say, 5 to 10 years, not to optimize widespread adoption, but to optimize revenue for the licensors. And it's very clear to me what's going on, and you see it in lots of ways. You see companies exit markets because they don't want to be extorted or have to pay something that's too high for some of their customers to be able to afford their products anymore. You see it in companies bringing lawsuits, like HP brought a lawsuit, I think yesterday, against Access Advanced members to try to get a fair price. And they even asked, I think a little bit alarmingly, for what a royalty, if any, should be if they disable functionality in their products. So we're at a crossroads now where the price of this technology is no longer designed for ubiquity. It's designed for revenue generation, revenue optimization. And just as a person, I actually worry a lot about that. I like to live in a world where I can afford to get things that make my life better, and I would like that to be true for a lot of people. So I know Codex is not earth-shatteringly different for people's lives, but it is a way that we can I do think that the pricing of Codex is creating a fractured market, and so I worry about that a lot. There are definitely a growing number of companies trying to license in this technology space. That by itself, to me, is not a concern. I know that others might feel like multiple pools makes things more complicated. That's not a concern to me. What's the concern is the underlying model. What is the underlying goal of these pools or of these licensors? And in my mind, the underlying goal now is revenue optimization and not for ubiquity, which is really not what standards are there to do. As far as codec licensing itself, I do think it's become more aggressive. I think others have mentioned that there's licensing at the service level when you're like renting a movie or watching content versus the hardware that you buy. So it's gotten a lot more sophisticated. Again, I actually feel like as long as the pricing is reasonable and it leads to ubiquity, I don't really mind the complexity of the model. But I do worry overall that today's licensing regime is not one that leads to a world where everyone has access to the technology. That's the biggest concern that I have.
Interesting. Thank you so much for your view here on this one, John. And I can agree as an economist, I'm always thinking about innovation. I think the worst situation also for the SEP licensors would be that any licensing causes less adoption of the technology. And I think that's against what everyone wants. So switching off a feature in a product, as you say, indeed is alarming. Very interesting points. Over to you, Luke. Luke McLero, you are the president of Avanci Video. We heard your name already twice today. So we're excited to hear about that new program that Avanci launched in October, I think, last year. Your background, you have launched other programs at Avanci before in the cellular licensing space. So I would love to hear more about the new video codec licensing program. I would love to hear how you think video codec licensing may be different to cellular licensing. And since we're at it, there's been the first question here from the audience. The audience would love to understand if we are licensing in the video world now, the streaming media platforms, what is then the basis of calculation? It can't be the hardware. So what would be the basis of how you would calculate a royalty fee? So a lot of questions, but I would love to hear from you now, Luke.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tim. And I'll start with the kind of the big picture question. How does video compare to cellular? There are a lot of similarities in that both areas have a strong tradition of global and open standards that have enabled competitive and vibrant markets for products and services that, to John's point, I think really improve our lives. And in both cases, I think everybody is looking for SEP licensing terms. Certainly we are. that strike the right balance between enabling ubiquity, getting them in everybody's hands, but also rewarding the innovation that created the standard in the first place to inspire more innovation in the future. So certainly that is the big similarity between the two. The main difference between the two, as Rob sort of went through, the video space has a history of a lot of patent pools, a lot of joint licensing, a lot of efforts to streamline licensing. But until our Avanci vehicle program and the IoT things we've done with cellular, that wasn't really the case for cellular. That was a lot more bilateral licensing for good and specific reasons. But I think that's been the big difference between the two. You know, turning to video and our program Avanci Video, I mean, we see the biggest development over the last few years and sort of helped along by COVID is the rise of internet video streaming, and that it's replacing other more traditional forms of content distribution, whether that's satellite technology, cable technology, over-the-air antennas, DVDs. I mean, streaming is replacing all of that. And that, to us, is what presents the opportunity to create a new platform in this area, because it gives us a blank slate to improve the way licensing is done. You know, there's multiple video codecs that Rob and Manoj went through. Those have typically in the past been licensed one standard at a time, even though most implementers need a license to all of the standards to make effective products and services. So bringing those together, and then also to something Rob mentioned in his history, bringing it back to where there is a one-stop license available, where all of the licensors are working through the same pool or platform to make that licensing as easy as possible and get to the ubiquity that John was talking about. So that's where we see the opportunity for Avanci Video. Finally, the last question, the one that came through in the chat, is a fantastic question. We've spent hours and hours talking with patent owners, with streaming companies about what's the right way to price royalties here, so you fairly track the usage of this standardized technology in a streaming service. And there's different possible options. There's different metrics you can look at. You can look at the number of users or subscribers. You can look at the number of gigabytes or terabytes that are sent out by a service during a period of time. And you can also look at revenues, either subscription fees or advertising fees that are generated through the video. And there's pros and cons of each of those different approaches. And that's one of the things we're studying and talking about right now with all the stakeholders, trying to come up with a fair system that works for everyone. So I'll stop there, Tim. Hopefully that answers the chat question as well as everything else you mentioned.
Perfect. No, I think that's a great first insight. Of course, I will shoot more questions to that program at the next stage. I now want to talk a little bit more about pools and the role of pools in the SEP licensing market. And I think maybe over to you, John, again, as an implementer. You already mentioned that the number of pools, the fragmentation doesn't even worry you too much. But I wonder then, what in your opinion makes a good patent pool? Is it the coverage of patents of these pools? Is it the pricing? Is it the way they approach you? What is, in your view, a good pool program, and what may be also one that you find critical, and why would you find that critical? And maybe the last question would also be, there's you know, now other codecs and programs in there, but they're in separate pools. And as Luke said, don't we want a one-stop shop? What is your opinion on that? Shouldn't we have a one-stop shop where all the codecs are combined? Even though we have separate pools with separate members, shouldn't they at least offer all codecs? What is your opinion on that?
I would certainly, it would be more convenient as a licensee to have one place to take a license for all the different codecs that are being used in products that we sell. So no doubt that it would be easier. I think that the reason why you see multiple pools in any space, and maybe even defining by codec rather than all codecs and things like that, the reason why you see division That's the question to ask ourselves. Why isn't there one place? And I believe that the reason why is because the underlying purpose of the pool is no longer ubiquity. So there are going to be groups of people who will want to propel the technology to be widespread adopted. And there'll be other groups of people who are saying, you know what, I want to get paid twice as much as other people, and or more than other people, or I think this one technology is worth more than all the other technologies in the past, and they're going to test the market to see whether or not that they can realize more revenue. And so I think that explains why we have all this fractured pool stuff going on, is because the underlying purpose of these organizations is no longer aligned with the underlying purpose of standardization in the first place. And I find that part concerning. If there's 4 or 5 pools, but they all have a similar motivation to have widespread adoption, I think we could work that out and take licenses across. Certainly, it would be easier if everyone were in one place and take one license. But I think the real question to ask ourselves is, why is the pool market fractured as it is? And to me, the logical explanation is money, not adoption. So I guess one other thing I would say is what would be an indicator of a pool that I think is successful might be like the rate of licensees joining the pool or taking licenses. I know with MPEG-LA, with H.264, it's a very easy thing to explain to my current business. And I've been in 3 different companies, so I've had this conversation at multiple places that I've worked. It's easier to explain why joining a pool as a licensee is a good idea when there are thousands of other licensees who've already taken that license. So that would be something that I would look for. I think Velos as a pool, just as an example, didn't have wide pickup on licensing, from licensees, and we could wonder why. I think the reason why was price, but I don't think it's necessarily what the patents are, what the terms are. I think it's really underlying motivation for what they're trying to achieve. So I'll just stop there. I know we're short on time, so I'll stop there.
No, very good. Thank you for your input, John. And I also think that the market of patent pools also, needs to succeed in terms of finding a right price, because there's also some power licensees have not to join. So I think as long as that is in the balance, we may also see some pool failures, which is fine. I think pools in general, I would say, are typically facilitating adoption and licensing. But there are companies that typically don't join pools. And now over to you, Manoj. Qualcomm, in the history of what Rob presented, hasn't joined any of those pools, but you have, of course, a very successful bilateral licensing program. And maybe it would be good to understand the decision not to join a pool, and how bilateral licensing differs from pool licensing, and why Qualcomm chose that route for the licensing programs that you're running.
Hey, certainly, Tim. So let me first say that there is always internal evaluation. We look at both pool licensing as well as bilateral licensing, always. And there is no one-size-fits-all solution here. So let me give you an example. Consider a Avanci vehicle. Qualcomm has a successful automotive licensing program where we license tier 1s and tier 2s in the industry. However, we work with Avanci, we work with other licensors to put together long-term industry solution. So that's an example where we changed our bilateral licensing practice to more pool-based licensing. Having said that, broadly, bilateral licensing, that is mainstay of our licensing strategy. We've been licensing for more than 30 years, and that has brought us expertise, internal expertise, infrastructure. We also have vital relationships with the industry. Bilateral licensing also gives us more control in execution of our strategy. It also gives us flexibility in managing overlap we may have with our other existing licensing programs. Going back to the pools, maybe I can give you like a broader framework, how we think through whether to join pool and what pool can bring us. So we look at overall market. I think one of the key metric really is we want to understand the value the technology, the patented technology brings to the industry. That's the key metric. We also consider potential for the pool to develop long-term industry solution, like I mentioned earlier. We build carefully financial scenarios that take into account pricing, royalty distribution structure. We are also very mindful of administration overheads, any dilutions that they can bring in. In summary, though, you are correct, right? The key question we are answering is, are we getting the right value for contribution of our patent portfolio? I think this is more common sense, but we bring more rigor and data-driven approach to this. I hope this provides context for our thinking to you.
Great. No, it definitely does. Thank you, Manoj, for these insights on your decision to license and not. And I fully understand if you have a very successful licensing team that you also want to use that to commercialize your patents. Over to you again, Luke. I have seen here many questions also with regards to Avanci, and some more detail is requested here. I don't know if you want to or can already answer some of that. Some were wondering about some ballpark numbers of your structured fees for the new program. Others are wondering if you could give more details on what Avanci Video, what kind of baseline that you will use. I'm also interested into the program compared to maybe other programs. You have added first SEP licensors in your program, but different to a vehicle program where all actually of the major SEP owners are part. It's a little different for Avanci Video. Some of the major players are outside of the pool, like the Qualcomms, Nokia's, Ericsson's. Maybe to give some background, is that still a goal, or did you know that in video the world looks different and we had a different approach here? Can you give us some insights on that?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, not too much on the question about royalty rates, just because they're not fixed yet. The way we approach finding the right royalty rates is talking with as many licensors and licensees as possible to hear everyone's input and find a set of royalty terms that companies on both sides can agree to, and then building a consensus around that. So we don't just talk to licensors, we don't just talk to licensees, we want everybody's opinion reflected in our royalty rates, and we're not done with that process yet. But as soon as we sign our first license agreement and those terms are fixed, we will announce them. You will find them on our website, just like our other platforms. And in terms of the progress and what our vision is, we absolutely see this program becoming a one-stop solution for all licensors. We hope that Manoj and Qualcomm will make the decision to join our platform one day for sure. You I think made the comparison to Avanci Vehicle, where we now have nearly 70 licensors participating. But you're comparing Avanci Vehicle after 8 years to Avanci Video after about 8 months. If you compare where Avanci Video is 8 months in compared to where Avanci Vehicle was 8 months in, we have 26 patent owners participating in Avanci Video today. We only had 8 or maybe 9 patent owners participating in Avanci Vehicle 8 months in. So from my perspective, we're way ahead of schedule compared to Avanci Vehicle. I mean, I think it helps that we've had that success and that people appreciate the way our platform works in general to really drive the participation faster and faster for Avanci Video than we did for Vehicle. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. We do see this at the end of the day being a one-stop solution where it is dozens of patent owners, 80–90% of all patents at least, as well as having nearly unanimous support of licensees so that it adds the most value for everybody.
Great. Maybe one quick follow-up question, because it's also here in the chat, is the challenge of finding the right price point and also baseline, because you have different members' business models. Here someone compares an NPE to a company that maybe also has products in the market that also is a licensee at the same time. Is that one part of it? Or is it also more talking to the implementer side and see what they would prefer as a model?
Yeah, I think that there is the same tug of war you have in every license negotiation, is that generally licensors would like royalties to be higher and generally licensees want them to be lower. But you do have the added wrinkle here that among streaming companies, there are multiple business models. Some companies primarily generate revenue through subscription fees. Others, there's no cost to watch the video, but you'll watch advertisements along the way, and that's how they generate the revenue. Some companies have large libraries of user-generated videos, right, that go on and on and on forever. Others are much more curated Hollywood content. And so even among the licensees, trying to find an agreement on the right way to measure royalties is a little bit of a challenge, and something that we're trying to drive a consensus on to put those terms together.
Very good. Thank you for those insights, Luke. Over to you, Rob. Also here, I want to include some of the questions of the audience. From your perspective, you gave us that great overview of pools. The first question would be, in your opinion, as an expert in the world of pools, do you see fragmentation as a problem for adoption? And another question that came up here, because you mentioned Sysvel pool, which actually covers two codecs that were at some point promoted as royalty-free. How does that come together? I mean, I think you touched on it already a little bit, but I think some people are still wondering, isn't AV1, VP9, aren't these open, royalty-free standards? How come there's a pool now? Maybe also some insights there, or maybe some more detail to what you already referred to.
Thanks, Tim. So just quickly on Sysvel, I think the Alliance for Open Media took a position that these codecs were, that the AV1 and VPX suite of codecs were royalty-free. Ultimately, they paid to clear patent risk. So I think people can draw their own conclusions based on that. And by the way, this is an argument that Google has been making since it bought On2 in 2010 for over $100 million and invested millions of dollars a year since into the codec ecosystem to rival the MPEG suite of codecs. And also bear in mind that Google, as the owner of YouTube, was primarily not asked to bear much of the royalty burden before any content providers were asked to pay into the overall royalty stack here. I just want to say, I feel like in our business, we are a bit myopic. There's the amount of money that changes hands from patent pools and enterprise caps, to me, is as just a guy who helps companies in this field is enormous. But to these companies themselves, should not probably be driving business decisions. We have, and as people concerned with patent royalties, we think that the actions we take are what actually dictates the direction of these patent pools. I don't think that's often the case. So, for instance, if you a few years ago, it was reported that Apple spent about $300 million to store 8 million terabytes of information for its iCloud customers, and most of that information was video, and it was encoded in HEVC. If they upgraded to VVC and enjoyed hypothetically 50% savings off of that, they would presumably save over $100 million a year in storage costs. That would far exceed whatever they would be asked to pay for the patent pools to comply with the VVC standard. So I don't think that and that's just one aspect of the overall benefit Apple could enjoy. And you also think about just what the market has endured in terms of price point for codecs in the past. The overall royalty stack today, if you adjust for inflation or if you compare it to as a percentage of ASP, is historically low for the feature of compliance with video compression. Nearly all implementers of codecs took pool licenses 20 years ago to MPEG-2 and AVC, which had a combined cost of $4.20 per unit, which is about $7 today, 20 years ago versus today. A BlackBerry, the leading smartphone at the time, was about $400 or so. If you took a license to HEVC and VVC today from via LA and Access, you'd pay 80 or 90 cents per unit for a phone sold in the US. And the average iPhone sales price in the US was nearly $1,000 last year. So by really any metric, companies are paying far less for the feature of compliance with video compression, and video compression has the potential to unlock savings that would more than pay for its patent costs. So that cannot be the reason why companies are deciding whether to support one codec versus another. Just in pools in general, I'll say my prior is that pools are a tremendous positive. Predictable costs and revenue help implementers understand whether and how to invest in standard setting and in implementation. I think that more participants in standard setting generally means better standards. And of course, without implementers, standards are meaningless. So the question, getting back to my earlier point, is really how do we differentiate between pools that have been successful and those that haven't? I think really it comes down to the underlying technology. Is this technology compelling? Is there a use case that demands adoption of this technology? And is the risk here material? The risk that the patent pool would clear material? And I'm not just talking about in terms of royalties. Is there a material risk of an injunction, for instance? That's something people might consider. That the revenue at stake in an injunction would far exceed whatever whatever the patent cost would be in terms of royalties.
Very good. Thank you so much for your view on that point, Rob. And since we are quite already along with the time, I would ask each of you to give me maybe a minute or max of 2 minutes of what the future brings. And maybe starting with you, Manoj, what do you think is the future of video licensing? Where do you see the next markets? Any insights on that?
Certainly. So video technology is bringing tremendous value to consumers and businesses. VVC today is great milestone, and there is exciting roadmap ahead of us. So video technology has very solid, robust long-term roadmap. And we see very exciting use cases going ahead, right? So in addition to traditional use cases, there are new avenues, like for example, video for machines, AI playing very important role in video generation as well as compressions. So all those technology innovations, they're going to create new use cases. Let me take machine video as example. So over there, object recognition, object detection, object tracking. So more computer vision centric use cases will become very important. And completely new compression techniques, right? So techniques that are going to extract features, compress features, as well as traditional hybrid block-based coding can be important. So technology is evolving, use cases are evolving, and we'll continue creating this new technology, partnering with the ecosystem to bring these new technologies to market.
Very good. Thank you, Manoj, for your input. Luke, sounds like a lot more pool programs for you when I look at all these different applications. What is the future going to bring for Avanci Video? Will you also go beyond over-the-air streaming to other industries? Will that be a new program? Any ideas, any outlook for that?
No, for us, we are focused 100% on the streaming market right now. That's where we see the opportunity to improve the way licensing is done in the video area. And kind of from a broader point of view, what I'm excited about is I think in the next few years, we're going to see a lot of movement from the older technology, AVC, which has been a huge success, to HEVC and VVC, which is going to bring us a lot of benefits. Some that we'll notice, our videos won't take up so much storage space on our computer, but some we won't notice, but they're maybe even more important. It's saving the amount of data that's sent over the internet, reducing the storage, reducing the energy consumption. As we are consuming so much video, we're doing it in more efficient ways.
Very good. Over to you, John. Where do you see the future? How licensed is the market? Is VVC already a lot of, did you license already a lot of VVC yet? Is that for the future? Is it implemented in most of your products? Can you comment on this?
Yeah, I can, and I'll try to be really quick here. I think where we are in the industry, not just PC industry, but like consumer electronics devices industry, is that we're very clearly heading towards a pay-as-you-go model. And I think that that's going to mean that if you want VVC on your device or in your services, you're going to have to separately pay for it. So that's going to be pushed all the way down to the consumer or the purchaser. And I think that means that you're going to have significant segmentation in the market. There'll be people who probably everyone on this webinar can probably afford to get VVC. But Lenovo sells computers at the $200 price point, or even less than $200, and they sell computers at the thousands of dollars price point. And so this model of maybe $7, it sounds like not a lot of money for someone buying a $150 $200 device for their kid to go to school, that is a huge amount of money for them, and they may not be able to afford to buy the device. So I think we're heading towards a world where we don't have ubiquity and it'll be a pay-as-you-go. I think VVC has a hard road ahead of it for adoption in certain industries. I think that companies like Intel or AMD or NVIDIA will be very skittish about adopting it into their products right off the bat. And so I think we're going to see a different model of what consumers can pay for and buy. That's what I think is going to happen.
Very good. Last but not least, you, Rob, what is coming up on the horizon? One of the questions also was when do we expect even finishing of the next codec after VVC? Even though VVC hasn't been adopted, it's a technology that has been there already for 4 years now. But where do you see the future?
Just pushing back real quickly on John's point, Intel presently is implementing VVC in laptops. Where's the future going? So there has been, well, just piggybacking on what Manoj said, I do see a lot of potential in machine-to-machine video compression. This is about half of all video. And because video is 80% of all internet traffic, it's 40% of all internet traffic. And we keep encoding video to preserve details that don't matter for machines and don't enable machine functionality. We're making sure that video captures the majesty of the sunset, but that doesn't matter for a surveillance camera. They just care, is that an intruder or not? So there's been a lot of movement at MPEG and a lot of movement including at JVET to extend VVC to encompass this functionality, and as well as separate standards, video coding for machines and feature coding for machines. Those are pretty exciting. Video coding for machines should be finalized in the committee draft should be finalized in January, with feature coding for machines being finalized about 6 months later, the committee draft being finalized. So in terms of the next gen codec, there has been at the most recent MPEG meeting, there was some discussion or a proposal to go and begin standard setting for H.267. I wasn't aware of, I wasn't able to glean from the documents what the proposed use case would be that wasn't already met by existing codecs. So I'm going to stay tuned for that one. But I will say it's an interesting time to be doing this, just because we seem like we're on the verge of being able to take advantage of developments in machine learning to really revolutionize video compression. But the resource cost might be too intense at this point. It might be prudent to wait a few years for the resource cost to go down so that we can come up with a codec that really takes advantage and revolutionizes video coding.
Great. Thank you, everyone. One last comment I got from the audience here, that everyone was really excited about seeing a patent pool, a technology producer, a product company, and then market expert in one webinar, having all these different viewpoints. We may not always agree, but I think we got really great perspectives here. I learned a lot. I think many of our listeners learned a lot too. Thank you guys for making this a great session. As I said, it is recorded. We're going to share the recording. We're going to share the report and also the slides. And we also have a few questions unanswered that we will share with our experts after this meeting. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Thanks to the experts again for a great session, great insights. And I hope to see you all soon again. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, panel.